Have you ever destroyed something sacred? Not by accident, but on purpose, looking into the eyes of someone begging for mercy and still moving forward like you were doing justice? I destroyed Solomon's temple. By my command, it burned. With fire. With my hands, the holy objects were taken to my Babylon as trophies. But what no one knows is what burned inside of me that day. Why did such a powerful king lose his mind like a wild animal? Why would God use a man like me to carry out his judgment, then break me completely? This isn't just the story of an ancient war. It's the story of how God deals with pride, with sin, and with kings who think they are gods. If you stay with me to the end, I'll show you how the greatest victory of my life became the beginning of my downfall, and strangely, my salvation. Babylon was not just a city. It was the reflection of my mind, the mirror of my pride, the throne of my vanity. I ordered walls so wide that chariots could race side by side on them. I built towers so high they seemed to reach the sky, and I walked through the hanging gardens feeling that no god or man could ever touch me. They called me the Lion of Babylon, the King of Kings, Lord of Empires. But what no one saw, and maybe I didn't want to admit, was that behind all that greatness there was a restlessness that even golden columns couldn't hide. It was fear disguised as strength, insecurity hiding behind conquest, a hunger for control that even the greatest victories couldn't satisfy. What was I afraid of? That one day, someone greater than me would step into my story and show me how small I really was. In those days, the sound of Babylon's trumpets echoed through marble halls, scribes wrote down my victories on clay tablets, and stone gods received sacrifices in my name. I was worshipped like a demigod, and almost no one dared to contradict me. But there were rumors, voices from the Hebrew captives speaking of an invisible God who didn't live in statues, who didn't need palaces or gold, but who ruled over everything, even me. And those stories, even whispered in dark corners, started to bother me more than any military threat, because deep down, I knew no empire is eternal, and every throne, no matter how high, can be shaken. But at that time, I wasn't willing to listen. I thought I could defeat any prophecy, silence any god, and shape my destiny with my own hands. With that mindset, my eyes turned to Jerusalem, a smaller city, a rebellious people, a temple made of stone. I thought, if I conquered Egypt, Assyria, and Elam, what could stop me from destroying a sanctuary on some distant hill? What I didn't know was that hill held something no weapon of mine could ever burn. And that's exactly where the next part of my story begins. Jeremiah was different from every man I ever met. He didn't dress like a priest, didn't speak like a court official, didn't beg for favors or fear threats. He spoke like someone who had seen destruction before it arrived, like someone who heard the voice of a God who didn't need gold or armies to reign. This is what the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, says: I will bring on this city and on all who live in it every disaster I pronounced against them, because they stiffened their necks and would not listen to my words. Jeremiah 19:15. His words weren't soft, but cut through the soul like a sharp sword. And even when he was arrested, chased, and humiliated, he didn't stop speaking. It was like he already knew. The temple would fall, the kings would fall, the walls would fall, but the truth of God would still stand. There was something about him that disturbed even those who didn't believe. My officials brought me reports of his prophecies, and even when mocking him, I saw fear in their eyes. Because Jeremiah didn't predict the future like a gambler making guesses. He announced judgment like someone who had already read the final verdict. And even then, in the middle of the destruction coming near, he spoke of hope. It was like he was saying, God will allow everything to fall apart, but he won't let everything be lost. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. That deeply intrigued me. A God who punishes but also promises a new beginning? That idea chased me for a long time. Jeremiah wasn't just a prophet. He was a mirror God placed in front of Jerusalem, a mirror that showed not only the people's idolatry, but also the pride of their kings, the indifference of their priests, and the rottenness of their system. And in that reflection, I saw something of myself, a king who trusted his own walls, an empire that believed it could defy heaven. The difference was, he was ready to lose everything because he knew God could. Rebuild. I wasn't. I was only ready to win, and that was the root of my fall. The siege of Jerusalem was a war with no visible battles, a slow kind of torture where time itself became the weapon. For almost 2 years, we surrounded the city in silence and control, like a patient predator waiting for its prey to surrender. Nothing went in, nothing came out, and each passing week stripped away the people's dignity. First food ran low, then bodies grew thinner, and finally, their eyes, those eyes, started to lose the light of hope. And from the outside, I watched, not with joy, but with a strange mix of command and discomfort. I knew there was an order to follow, but something inside me sensed that this victory would not taste like triumph. Zedekiah, the last king left, refused to surrender. He was like a captain who chooses to go down with the ship, even when there's still a chance to save those on board. He trusted allies who never came, strategies that never worked, and promises that had lost their weight. Jeremiah warned him, again and again, surrender and you will live, resist and you will die. But Zedekiah believed surrender was weakness, and it was that pride that condemned Jerusalem. When he finally tried to flee in the middle of the night, destiny found him. He was captured, saw his sons killed before his eyes, and then had his eyes removed, a cruel symbol of the spiritual blindness that led him. Lamentations describes how, in that city, desperation reached a level no one could imagine. The hands of compassionate women have cooked their own children. They became their food during the destruction of the daughter of my people. Lamentations 4:10. When a city reaches that level of horror, it's no longer a political or military crisis. It's spiritual. Something had broken in the faith, in the people's morality, in the covenant with God. The siege didn't just destroy the walls. It revealed that everything inside was already in ruins. And at that point, when everything was about to collapse, I gave the order that would change my life forever. Go in and destroy the temple. And in the next chapter, you'll see how the fire that burns wood and gold can also melt the hardest heart. On the 9th day of the month of Av, when the skies over Jerusalem seemed to hold their breath, and the wind stepped back like it didn't want to witness what was coming, the order was given. Soldiers entered the temple courts, priests ran or collapsed in despair, and the flames rose, not just through the curtains of the Holy of Holies, but through memories, traditions, ancient promises that now burned with the walls. The burning of the temple wasn't just the loss of a building, it was a wound in the soul of an entire people, a rupture between heaven and earth. And as the fire consumed the altar, the incense, and the sacred scrolls, I, Nebuchadnezzar, stood. In silence, I had given the order to destroy it, but I couldn't command it to stop, because something inside me knew. That moment was bigger than my will. The bronze pillars, the golden lampstands, the table of showbread, all of it was taken, both as trophy and as witness. The Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars of the Lord's temple, the movable stands, and the bronze sea in the Lord's temple, and they carried the bronze to Babylon. 2 Kings 25:13. Every item had been shaped by consecrated hands, dedicated to a God who now seemed silent, but not defeated. The looting wasn't just an act of war, it was the physical proof of divine judgment. This wasn't just about taking wealth, it was about exposing a nation that had kept its sacred symbols, but lost the heart of its covenant. And when I touched each piece, didn't feel pride, I felt weight. It was as if every artifact whispered, "You won, but you don't know what you really lost." And while the exiles were being gathered, families torn apart, priests with their heads down, children crying without understanding, silence turned into mourning. It was the start of the diaspora, the exile, a new chapter marked not by the glory of Jerusalem, but by repentance in a foreign land. And I too began my own exile, even without leaving my city, because on that day something inside me burned away too, a layer of certainty, of control, of safety. I had conquered the city of God, but that victory would lead me to the most painful encounter of my life, the fall of myself. And in the next chapter, you'll see how the stones tell this story, and how even today, archaeology confirms what many still try to deny. Many centuries after the smoke had risen, the pillars had fallen, and the ashes had settled over Jerusalem. Like a mourning veil, human hands returned to dig the very ground my soldiers once walked. And what they found was exactly what Jeremiah had prophesied, and what I had witnessed with my own eyes: thick layers of ash, shards of pottery cracked by intense heat, charred wood beams and burned grain, all preserved by the same fire that destroyed the temple. In the royal quarter of the city of David, archaeologists found collapsed buildings still carrying the scars of the 586 BC destruction, with signs of massive fires, not small flare-ups, but a planned, total, devastating burn. And every layer they uncovered seemed to whisper, it was real, it was deep, it and it was just. What amazes me the most, even now as a broken spirit looking back, is that even modern science agrees something unexplainable happened there. Archaeomagnetic studies, like those led by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, showed that the magnetic fields in clay and burned bricks from Jerusalem matched the exact heat and precise time of the destruction, just like 2 Kings 25 described. These aren't myths or legends. These are data, measurement, atoms rearranged by a judgment that came from heaven through the hands of a man like me. And in a way, that haunts me still, to know that even the stones, silent by nature, keep shouting the same truth Jeremiah once declared. They didn't just find physical remains. They also found Babylonian arrowheads, broken Judean royal seals, and even entire houses that collapsed with their tools still in place, like time had frozen that day forever. These discoveries don't just prove there was a violent, prolonged siege, but also that the city was taken with such force it erased nearly every sign of resistance, except one: faith. Because even though everything else was destroyed, God's name still echoed through the ruins. And in the next chapter, you'll see that even the holiest objects were taken, and with them, an entire nation had to learn that God's presence isn't stored in cups of gold. That morning, with no birds singing, when the temple was already just a burned shell, I sent my men into what was left of the holy place. They weren't looting like savages. They were following orders. Every item had to be collected, weighed, recorded, and transported. The two great bronze pillars, named Jachin and Boaz, which stood at the temple's entrance since Solomon's time, were broken and melted. The great bronze sea, the lampstands, the bowls of pure gold, the pans, the basins, everything was removed from the place that once served the God of Israel and turned into treasure for the palace of Babylon. They took away the pots, shovels, wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles used in temple service. 2 Kings 25:14. What once was touched only with fear and reverence was now stacked on carts like it was just valuable metal. But while each item was taken from the temple, something invisible also left those broken columns. It was like the silence carried the weight of what those objects meant, not just in value, but in spirit. Those items weren't decoration. They were living memories of the covenant between God and His people, instruments of forgiveness, sacrifice, and communion. And now, they were being used to decorate the halls of my palace, until the day my grandson, Belshazzar, chose to defile them at a drunken feast full of arrogance. But that is another story. In that moment, I just saw men doing their work, lifting heavy things. I didn't know, or didn't want to know, that they were also carrying pieces of divine history, torn from an altar that had been abandoned long before it was ever burned. And even though I wanted to believe that victory was complete, it had the bitter taste of something gained too late. because the treasures we took to Babylon didn't shine like before. It was as if the glory had left with the smoke, and on the faces of the exiles, as they watched their sacred symbols being taken away, I saw not just pain, but understanding. They knew what they had lost, and maybe, in that moment, they started to remember what they had stopped valuing. In the next chapter, you'll understand why I, the man who touched the sacred with unclean hands, ended up losing my mind, and how the same hand that used me also broke me. The day I lost my mind started with a dream so vivid it felt more like a prophecy stitched into my destiny. I saw a majestic tree so tall it touched the sky, with lush leaves and fruit that fed the world. Beneath it, animals found shade and birds made their nests. But suddenly, a messenger came down from heaven and said, "Cut down the tree, trim off its branches, scatter its fruit, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze, so the heart of this man may be changed, and he may become like the animals for 7 times." Daniel 4:14-16. I woke up breathless, surrounded by advisors who had no answers. It was Daniel, the Hebrew captive, who gave the meaning. That tree was me. My pride would be cut at the root and my reason taken away, until I acknowledged that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men. I tried to forget. I ignored it. I pushed it aside. But a year later, standing on the balcony of my palace, I looked at Babylon and let my heart speak louder than my conscience. Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Daniel 4:30. And before the echo of my arrogance faded, I heard a voice from heaven seal my fate. In seconds, my mind broke, my sanity vanished. I became like an animal. I lived in the fields, ate grass like oxen. My hair grew like feathers, my nails like claws. For 7 years, I was the king of nothing. No one recognized me. I, who once ruled the world, couldn't even form a thought. It was God's justice in its purest form. He didn't just humble me, He stripped me of everything false inside me. During that time, there was no throne, no honor, no name, only silence. And in that silence, what had been crushed began to be shaped. I don't know how to explain it, but in the 7th year, something moved inside me. I looked up to the sky, and for the first time, I saw with the eyes of the soul. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified Him who lives forever. Daniel 4:34. My mind came back, but with it came a new heart. I stopped being the center of my own story and started to recognize the true king. And in the next chapter, you'll understand how even science tried to explain my madness, but never could explain my healing. Years after it happened, scholars, doctors, and scientists tried to name what I went through. They called it boanthropy, a rare mental condition where a person believes they are an animal and starts behaving like one. Others suggested clinical lycanthropy, dissociative disorders, or psychotic breaks caused by extreme stress. And maybe, in part, they're right. My body did act like a beast. I ate grass, walked naked under the dew, growled like a wild animal, and didn't recognize my own reflection. But what they can't explain is why it started the exact day I defied the God of heaven. And even more, why, after 7 years, my reason returned like a sudden light, bringing not just clarity, but faith. Because there is something medicine can't measure: the sovereignty of God. Science may describe the symptoms, but it cannot explain the purpose. When I was at my most animal state, my spirit wasn't dead. It was waiting. God didn't destroy me. He rewired me. And in doing that, He showed that His power goes far beyond what eyes can see or what minds can process. Daniel, the same man who explained my dream, had told me clearly, "You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animal until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth." Daniel 4:25. This wasn't just punishment. It was process, a soul surgery. And if I had gone to doctors, maybe they would have treated the symptoms, but they would have missed the root of my sickness: pride. When my mind came back, I realized this wasn't just a mental collapse, it was a strategic miracle. God allowed my madness, but didn't allow my destruction. He showed me that not all illness is punishment. Sometimes it's correction, and not all humiliation is the end. Sometimes it's a new beginning. When I realized this, I didn't just return as a restored king. I returned as a redeemed man. And in the next chapter, you will hear with your own ears what I said to the whole empire and why my words that day changed the course of history. When my reason returned, I didn't come back the same. I came back like someone who had survived his own ego, someone who walked 7 years through the desert of forgetting and came out with a new heart. It wasn't just my mind that came back. It was a clarity so strong I could see everything differently. For the first time, I saw that my glory didn't come from me, that my victories, my buildings, my palaces, all of it was loaned, allowed, tolerated by God. And in that moment, I no longer cared for thrones or applause. I just wanted to say, in front of everyone, what I now knew with all my soul. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High and honored and glorified Him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom lasts from generation to generation. Daniel 4:34. That wasn't a political speech. It was a public confession. In front of nobles, scribes, and generals, I bowed, not to a stone statue, but to the invisible God who saw me at my highest, and didn't hesitate to bring me to my lowest. And there, I understood. His greatness doesn't need temples to show itself or statues to be respected. God is king because He is eternal, because He is just, because He does what must be done, even when it hurts. I had been the most powerful man on earth, and yet I had to become like a wild animal to finally see who truly rules the heavens. That surrender didn't shame me. It freed me, and my words echoed, not as royal propaganda, but as testimony. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of Heaven, because everything He does is right, and all His ways are just. And those who walk in pride, He is able to humble. Daniel 4:37. That day changed Babylon's history, but even more, it changed mine. I never looked at my throne the same way again. I never looked at people with pride again. I came to see that real royalty is recognizing His royalty, that real strength is knowing how to kneel, that no throne in the world compares to the peace of knowing you are, finally, on the right side of eternity. And in the next chapter, I want you to see that this story isn't just about me, it's about you, because the same God who restored me wants to restore anyone who's fallen, gotten lost, or forgotten what it means to live with a surrendered heart. Looking back, I see that my story is not just about conquest and collapse, but about what God does with those He loves too. Much to leave in their sin. The sin that ruled me wasn't just pride. It was the illusion of control, the well-told lie that I could be the master of my own fate, ignoring the invisible hand that held everything I had. God's judgment didn't come like a lightning strike. It came as a process. He warned me, surrounded me with signs, sent prophets, dreams, and warnings. And when I still resisted, He did what only a just father would do. He let me taste the bitter fruit of my choices. And that, though painful, was grace disguised as discipline. Because if He hadn't broken me, I would never have been rebuilt. If He hadn't silenced me, I would never have learned to listen. And this is what you need to understand. God is not just a judge. He is a father. He doesn't punish for pleasure. He corrects out of love. He allows you to fall, not to destroy you, but to grow your roots deeper. And if He could restore a pagan, arrogant, destructive king like me, then there's no story too far gone for Him to rewrite. So if you feel distant, dirty, disconnected, or lost, know this: God has not finished with you. Maybe he's just beginning. And in the next chapter, I want to invite you, not to an earthly kingdom, but to a journey that can change your eternity. Because if you've listened this far, it means the same God who reached me is reaching you now. If God had patience with me, a king who destroyed temples, mocked prophecies, and thought he was untouchable, imagine what he can do with someone like you, someone who's listening, reflecting, searching for answers with a sincere heart. He didn't break me to reject me, but to save me. And maybe everything you've lived so far, the falls, the losses, the silence, aren't the end, but the very place where he begins rebuilding something that can never be broken again. So if this story touched you, if something in your heart woke up or hurt, I want to invite you to take one step. There's a path back, a 30-day journey called Your 30 Steps from God that can help you walk out of pride, guilt, or confusion and find your way back to God's heart. It's not a book for religious people. It's for anyone tired of pretending to be strong and ready to live real redemption. What God did for me, He wants to do for you, and it all starts with one step. The link is in the first comment. The story doesn't end here. The temple fell, but Jerusalem is still at the center of prophecies being fulfilled right now. Something strange is happening with the Golden Gate, the sealed gate of the Holy City, and many believe it's tied to the return of the Messiah. Want to understand why? The video, The Sealed Jerusalem Gate is Moving, the Ignored Prophecy that is being fulfilled, is on your screen right now. Watch it, because maybe the next chapter of this story includes you.